The sound of shattering glass pierced the dusty air of Willow Creek as Harper Jameson hurled another empty bottle against the saloon wall. The year was 1876, and the frontier town nestled in the Colorado Territory had seen its fair share of broken spirits, but few as fiercely wounded as hers. Heads turned and conversations halted, but Harper didn't care. 3 years since her family's ranch had been seized. 3 years of working as a bookkeeper for men who thought a woman's education was a peculiar novelty. And now, the final insult, learning that her childhood sweetheart had married a banker's daughter from Denver. Miss Jameson. The saloon keeper, a portly man named Wilkins, approached cautiously. "I must insist you settle your tab and take your leave." Harper glared at him, her hazel eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why? Afraid I'll scare off your precious customers?" She gestured wildly at the room of miners, cowboys, and drifters. "None of them care if I'm here or not." "That's not true, Miss Jameson," Wilkins said, his voice softening. "But this behavior, no one wants me," Harper declared loudly, her voice cracking on the final word. "Not my family back east who disowned me when I followed my parents west. Not this town that took everything my father built. Not even," she stopped, unable to finish the thought. "Then they all missed their chance." The deep voice came from the doorway. Harper turned, along with every other patron, to see a tall figure silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. As he stepped into the dim light of the saloon, she could make out his features' strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, piercing blue eyes beneath the brim of a weather-beaten hat, and shoulders broad enough to suggest he was no stranger to hard work. Wilkins seemed to recognize the newcomer. "Quentin Wade. Haven't seen you ride through in nearly 2 years." The cowboy nodded slightly but kept his eyes fixed on Harper. "Been working cattle drives between Texas and Kansas." He moved toward her with the easy grace of a man who spent most of his life in a saddle. "Seems I've returned at an interesting time." Harper straightened her spine, mortification beginning to replace her anger. "I don't need rescue, especially from some drifting cowhand who doesn't know the first thing about me." A hint of a smile played at the corner of Quentin's mouth. "Wasn't offering rescue, madam, just making an observation." "Well, observe somewhere else," Harper snapped, grabbing her shawl from the back of her chair. She tossed a few coins onto the table. "That should cover the bottle and your wall, Mr. Wilkins." She pushed past Quentin, ignoring the warmth that radiated from him as their shoulders brushed. The late October air hit her flushed face, cooling her heated cheeks, but doing little to soothe her wounded pride. The dirt street stretched before her, lined with the modest buildings that made up Willow Creek's main thoroughfare. 3 years ago, she had believed this place would be her home forever. Now it felt like a prison, Miss Jameson. Harper didn't slow her stride as Quentin's boots crunched on the hard, packed earth behind her. "Leave me alone, Mr. Wade. You dropped this." She turned reluctantly. In his gloved hand was the small leather-bound journal she always carried, her father's last gift before fever had taken him. "Thank you," she said stiffly, reaching for it. Quentin held it just beyond her grasp. "Most folks who claim no one wants them are trying to convince themselves more than others." Harper's eyes narrowed. "Most cowboys who insert themselves into strangers' business are trying to avoid their own troubles." He laughed then, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. "Fair enough." He handed her the journal. "But my observation stands. Goodbye, Mr. Wade." Harper tucked the journal securely into her pocket and turned away. She didn't look back, though she could feel his eyes following her down the street until she turned the corner toward Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, where she'd taken a small room after losing the ranch. Her landlady looked up from her knitting as Harper entered. "You're home early, dear. Not feeling well?" Harper murmured, heading for the stairs. "A letter came for you, Mrs." Holloway pointed to a cream-colored envelope on the side table. "From back east, by the look of it." Harper's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the handwriting. Her Aunt Vivian, her mother's sister and the only family member who hadn't completely cut ties when Harper had refused to return to Boston after her parents' deaths. She tucked the letter into her pocket alongside the journal and hurried upstairs. Her room was small but neat, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and a desk where she often worked late into the night on the accounting ledgers for the general store. The window overlooked the street, and in the distance, she could see the foothills that eventually gave way to the mountains. Somewhere beyond them lay the wide open spaces where men like Quentin Wade made their living. She opened the letter with trembling fingers. "My dear Harper, I write with news that I hope will bring you some comfort in your continued grief. Your grandfather Ellsworth has passed, and while he maintained his disapproval of your choice to remain in that wilderness until the end, he was not so hard-hearted as to disinherit you completely. He has left you a sum of $5,000, which I have deposited with the Denver Bank in your name. I urge you to consider this an opportunity for a fresh start, perhaps in a more civilized setting than your current situation. Boston society has largely forgotten the scandal of your departure, and with your education and this inheritance, you could establish yourself quite respectably here. Your affectionate aunt, Vivian." Harper sank onto the edge of her bed, the letter clutched in her hand. $5,000. It was a fortune by any measure, certainly enough to leave Willow Creek behind forever. She could go to Denver, or maybe San Francisco. She could start anew somewhere no one knew of her failures, or she could stay and reclaim what was rightfully hers. The thought took root immediately. The Jameson ranch had been sold to satisfy her father's debts after his death, purchased by Wallace Harding, the owner of the largest cattle operation in the territory. Harper had always suspected the debts had been exaggerated, that papers had been falsified while she was lost in grief. But without money for lawyers or influence with the local judge, she'd had no recourse. Now, perhaps she did. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Harper," Mrs. Holloway called. "There's a gentleman asking after you, says his name is Quentin Wade." Harper frowned. "Tell him I'm indisposed. He says it's a matter of some urgency regarding your father's property." Harper opened the door so quickly that Mrs. Holloway startled backward. "My father's property," Mrs. Holloway nodded, her expression curious. "That's what the man said. He's waiting in the parlor." Harper hurried down the stairs, her mind racing. How could this stranger know anything about her father's property? The ranch had been sold long before he'd arrived in town, by his own admission. Quentin stood by the window, hat in hand, looking oddly out of place in the dainty parlor with its flowered wallpaper and delicate furniture. He turned as she entered, and she was struck again by the intensity of his blue eyes. "Mr. Wade," she said coldly, "I believe I made it clear I didn't wish to speak with you further." "You did," he agreed, "but I thought you might make an exception when you learn what I have to say." "And what might that be?" "I knew your father, Miss Jameson." Harper's heart seemed to stop for a moment. "That's impossible." "My father died 3 years ago." "Yes, I know, but I worked for him before that. I was part of his crew that drove cattle to Kansas in '72. Harper's memories of that time were vivid. Her father had been gone for nearly 3 months, leaving her and her mother to manage the ranch. When he'd returned, he'd been flush with cash from the sale and full of stories about the drive. "If that's true, why didn't you say something at the saloon? Why have I never seen you in town before?" "I left the territory after that drive, headed to Texas to work the larger outfits. Only returned to Colorado recently," He paused. "And I didn't mention it at the saloon because what I have to tell you isn't for public knowledge." Mrs. Holloway hovered in the doorway, clearly fascinated by the exchange. Harper sighed. "Would you walk with me, Mr. Wade? I find I could use some fresh air after all." He nodded, settling his hat back on his head as they stepped out onto the porch. The sun was beginning to set, painting the western sky in shades of orange and gold. They walked in silence until they reached the small town park, little more than a grassy square with a few benches. "What do you know about my father's property?" Harper asked once they were seated. "I know it was stolen from you," Quentin said bluntly. "And I know how it was done." Harper stared at him. "What are you saying?" "Your father kept a separate set of books for the ranch, didn't he? Hidden somewhere on the property," her breath caught. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because he told me. On that cattle drive, we got to talking one night on watch. He mentioned he didn't trust the bankers in town, said they were too cozy with Harding. Said he kept his real accounts hidden in a place only you would know to look." The memory surfaced suddenly, her father showing her the hollow space behind the loose stone in the fireplace of his study, where he kept a metal box with documents. "For safekeeping," he'd told her with a wink. "Our little secret, Harper girl." But after his death, when she'd gone to look, the stone had been cemented over. She'd assumed it had been repaired during his illness, that he'd moved the documents elsewhere. By the time she thought to search more thoroughly, the ranch had been sold and she'd been forced to leave. "Even if what you're saying is true," Harper said carefully, "the ranch belongs to Harding now. It's been 3 years. Not if the sale was fraudulent," Quentin pointed out. "Not if your father's actual records show the ranch was solvent and the debts were invented. Why are you telling me this?" "Why do you care?" Quentin looked away, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "Your father was a good man. He gave me a chance when others wouldn't. I owe him. And it took you 3 years to repay that debt. I didn't know what had happened until I returned to the territory last month. Started asking around about the Jameson place, heard it had been sold after your father died." He turned back to her. "Then I heard about his daughter still living in town, working as a bookkeeper and drinking alone in saloons." Harper flushed. "You've been asking about me." "About the situation," he corrected. "But yes, about you too." "So what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Wade?" "I'm proposing we recover your father's records and use them to reclaim what's rightfully yours." "And how do you suggest we do that?" "The ranch house is occupied by Harding's foreman and his family. We can hardly stroll in and start tearing apart the fireplace." "Not the fireplace," Quentin said with a slight smile. "If your father was as careful as I think he was, he would have had more than one hiding place." Harper considered this. "There was an old oak tree near the creek," she said slowly. "It had a hollow space where I used to hide treasures as a child. Father knew about it." Quentin nodded. "That sounds promising. Is it visible from the house?" "No, it's a good quarter-mile away near where our property bordered public land." "Then that's where we'll start." He stood, offering her his hand. "If you're willing to try." Harper looked at his outstretched hand, then up at his face. In the fading light, she could see no guile there, only determination and something else, perhaps compassion. "Why did you really come back to Willow Creek, Mr. Wade?" His hand remained steady. "Maybe I was looking for something I'd left behind." Harper placed her hand in his, feeling the strength in his fingers as he helped her to her feet. "I'll meet you at dawn tomorrow at the crossroads east of town." "I'll be there," he promised, releasing her hand. As Harper watched him walk away, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 long years' hope. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when Harper reached the crossroads the next morning. She had dressed practically in a divided riding skirt and sturdy boots, with her hair braided and pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat. In her saddlebag was a small shovel. Along with bread and cheese Mrs. Holloway had pressed upon her when she'd explained she was going for an early morning ride. Quentin was already waiting, mounted on a tall sorrel gelding. He led a second horse, a dapple gray mare. "You brought a horse for me?" Harper asked, surprised. "Borrowed her from the livery. Figured it would be easier than you trying to arrange it without raising questions." Harper approached the mare, who snuffled gently at her outstretched hand. "She's beautiful. Her name's Whisper," Quentin said. "Livery owner says she's gentle but spirited. A good combination." Harper mounted smoothly, settling into the saddle with the ease of someone who had spent much of her life on horseback. "Shall we?" They rode in companionable silence as the sun crested the horizon, painting the landscape in soft golden light. The familiar terrain brought a flood of memories for Harper, riding these same trails with her father, learning the names of plants and tracking animal prints in the soft earth. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Wade," she said eventually. "You seem to know a great deal about me, but I know very little about you." Quentin adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Missouri. Father was a blacksmith. Left home at 16 after he died. Worked my way west with cattle outfits. No family. Mother passed when I was young. No siblings." He glanced at her. "What about you? Just your aunt back east?" Harper nodded. "My mother was from a wealthy Boston family, married my father against their wishes. When they moved west, I was sent to school in the East, expected to become a proper lady and make an advantageous match." She smiled ruefully. "I disappointed them by preferring mathematics to embroidery and books to balls." "And then you chose to stay out here instead of returning to Boston after your parents died." "This was home," Harper said simply. "Boston never was." They crested a small rise, and suddenly the Jameson ranch spread out before them in the valley below. The main house was visible in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney in the cool morning air. Closer to them was the creek that bisected the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows. "We should approach from the public land side," Harper said, pointing to a stand of trees to their right. "There's less chance of being seen that way." Quentin nodded, and they altered their course accordingly. As they rode, Harper couldn't help but notice the changes to the land she had once known so intimately. Fences had been moved, new outbuildings constructed. It was still beautiful, but it wasn't quite the same place she remembered. They tethered their horses in a small grove and proceeded on foot to the creek. The water ran clear and cold, just as Harper remembered. She oriented herself using the distinctive bend in the stream, then scanned the bank until she spotted the gnarled oak that had been her childhood hideaway. "There," she said, pointing. "That's the tree." It stood as she remembered, ancient and imposing, its massive trunk split at the base to form a natural hollow. As children, she and her friends had imagined it was a doorway to another world. Now she prayed it might be a doorway to justice. Kneeling at the base of the tree, Harper reached into the hollow. It was deeper than she remembered, her arm disappearing up to the shoulder as she explored the space. For a moment, she feared it would be empty, but then her fingers brushed against something solid and metallic. "I think I've found something," she said, excitement rising in her voice. She strained, fingertips just able to grasp the edge of the object. Slowly, she worked it forward until she could pull it free, a small metal box, similar to the one she remembered from the fireplace hiding place. Her hands trembled as she set it on the ground between them. It was locked, but the key her father had always worn on a chain around his neck had been buried with him. "Allow me," Quentin said, pulling a small leather case from his pocket. He withdrew several thin metal tools and set to work on the lock. In less than a minute, there was a soft click, and the lid lifted slightly. Harper held her breath as she opened the box fully. Inside were several folded documents, along with a small leather-bound book similar to the journal she carried. She opened it first, immediately recognizing her father's bold handwriting. "These are his real accounts," she said, skimming the neat columns of figures. "And look, receipts for cattle sales, bank drafts." She pulled out a folded document from beneath the book. "This is a deed to another property. I didn't know he owned land besides the ranch." "May I?" Quentin asked, holding out his hand for the deed. Harper passed it to him, continuing to examine the other papers while he studied it. "This is for a parcel bordering the northwest corner of your ranch," he said after a moment. "Purchased 6 months before your father died. Why would he buy more land when the ranch was supposedly in debt?" Harper wondered aloud. Then understanding dawned. "Because it wasn't in debt. The ranch was profitable, just as I always believed." "And there's more," Quentin said, handing her another document from the box. "This appears to be a letter from a lawyer in Denver, acknowledging receipt of evidence against Wallace Harding for fraudulent business practices." Harper scanned the letter, dated just 2 weeks before her father's sudden illness. He was building a case against Harding. He must have suspected what would happen if anything happened to him. "And then he conveniently fell ill," Quentin said grimly. The implication hung heavy between them. Harper had never considered that her father's death might have been anything but natural. The thought made her blood run cold. "We should take these to the sheriff," she said, gathering the papers back into the box. Quentin shook his head. "Sheriff Brody is in Harding's pocket, always has been." "Then what do we do?" the lawyer in Denver, Quentin suggested. "If your father was working with him, he might still have the evidence that was sent." Harper nodded, securing the box and rising to her feet. "We'll need to be careful leaving. If anyone from the ranch spots us—" "Too late for that," a gruff voice interrupted. Harper spun to see 2 men on horseback emerging from the trees behind them. She recognized the older one immediately, Frank Turner, Harding's foreman, who now lived in what had once been her family home. The younger man was unfamiliar, but the rifle he pointed in their direction needed no introduction. "Well, well," Turner said, his weathered face splitting in an unpleasant smile. "If it isn't the Jameson girl trespassing on private property." His gaze shifted to Quentin. "And who might you be, friend?" "No friend of yours," Quentin replied evenly, subtly shifting to place himself between Harper and the rifles. Turner's eyes narrowed. "Wait a minute, I know you. You worked a drive for Jameson years back. Wade, wasn't it?" "Good memory," Quentin acknowledged. "What are you two doing out here?" Turner demanded, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "Just showing Mr. Wade where I grew up," Harper said quickly, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. "No harm in that. And what's in the box?" Turner nodded toward the metal container clutched in Harper's hands. "Just some childhood mementos," she lied. "Things I left behind when we moved." Turner wasn't fooled. "Hand it over, girl." "It doesn't belong to you," Harper said, her voice stronger now. She took a step backward, the creek gurgling behind her. "Everything on this land belongs to Mr. Harding now," Turner said, "including whatever you just dug up." He dismounted, keeping his gun trained on them as he approached. "Give me the box, and maybe I'll forget I saw you here." Harper glanced at Quentin, seeing the tension in his jaw. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But the box contained the only evidence that might help her reclaim her father's legacy. "I can't do that," she said. Turner's face darkened. "Then I'll take it from you." He lunged forward. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Quentin moved with startling speed, driving his shoulder into Turner's midsection before the man could reach Harper. The 2 men went down in a tangle of limbs, grappling in the dirt. The young ranch hand swung his rifle toward them, uncertain where to aim as the men rolled. "Run!" Quentin shouted to Harper between blows. Instead, she clutched the box tightly with one hand and reached for a heavy branch with the other. The young ranch hand saw her movement and started to swing his rifle in her direction. Before he could take aim, Harper hurled the branch at his horse's feet. The animal reared in panic, throwing its rider to the ground. Turner had managed to land a solid punch to Quentin's jaw, momentarily stunning him. He reached for his fallen pistol, but Harper was faster. She kicked it away, sending it splashing into the creek. "You little she-devil," Turner snarled, abandoning Quentin to lunge at her. Harper stumbled backward, losing her footing on the slippery bank. As she fell, the box flew from her grasp, landing open on the ground. Papers scattered in the breeze, some drifting toward the water. "No," she cried, scrambling to collect them. Quentin recovered quickly, tackling Turner again before he could reach Harper. This time, his fist connected solidly with the foreman's temple, leaving the older man dazed on the ground. The young ranch hand was struggling to control his spooked horse, giving them a brief window of opportunity. "The papers," Harper gasped, frantically gathering what she could. "Leave them," Quentin urged, pulling her to her feet. "We need to go now." "But the evidence, we have the journal," Quentin said, snatching it from where it had fallen. "That's the most important part. Come on." Reluctantly, Harper abandoned the scattered documents and ran with Quentin toward their tethered horses. Behind them, she could hear Turner shouting for his companion to shoot the bastards. A rifle cracked, the bullet splintering bark from a tree trunk near Harper's head. She ducked instinctively, but kept running. Quentin reached the horses first, untying them with swift, efficient movements. He practically threw Harper onto Whisper's back before mounting his own horse. They galloped away from the creek, taking a different route than they had arrived, heading west toward the mountains rather than back toward town. More shots rang out behind them, but soon they were out of range, the sounds of pursuit fading as they pushed their mounts harder. Only when they had put several miles between themselves and the ranch did Quentin signal for them to slow to a trot, giving the winded horses a chance to recover. "Are you all right?" he asked, scanning her for injuries. Harper nodded, still clutching her father's journal against her chest. Her heart hammered, and she could feel the flush of adrenaline hot in her cheeks. "I lost most of the evidence," she said, the reality of their situation sinking in. "But we have this." Quentin held up a folded document he'd managed to grab, the deed to the additional property her father had purchased. "And the journal. It's a start." "Turner will tell Harding what happened," Harper said. "They'll be looking for us." "Which is why we can't go back to town," Quentin agreed. "Not yet." "Where do we go, then?" Quentin gestured toward the mountains rising in the distance. "Your father's other property. It's up that way if I read the deed correctly. Might be a safe place to regroup." Harper considered this. The land would be undeveloped, possibly nothing more than a mining claim her father had acquired as an investment. But it would be somewhere Harding had no authority. "All right," she agreed. "But first, we need supplies." "There's a trading post about 5 miles from here, run by a Ute man named Joseph. He was always fair with my father. He might help us." Quentin nodded, and they altered their course accordingly. As they rode, Harper opened her father's journal, needing to confirm that it contained what she hoped. The pages were filled with meticulous records: cattle counts, expenses, profits from sales. More importantly, there were entries detailing suspicious activities by Harding and the bank manager, including what appeared to be attempts to sabotage the Jameson ranch by diverting water and intimidating hired hands into quitting. The final entries, dated in the weeks before her father's death, were the most disturbing. He had written of his suspicions that Harding was tampering with his medicine, replaced by the doctor who visited weekly to treat his chronic respiratory condition. "I fear for Harper should anything happen to me," he had written. "Harding wants this land too badly to allow her to keep it. I've hidden the truth where only she will find it, and I pray it will be enough to undo whatever schemes they enact." Harper closed the journal, a cold determination replacing her earlier fear. Her father had been murdered, his land stolen, and his daughter cast aside. But he had left her the means to fight back, and fight she would. The trading post was a low, rambling structure built of logs and local stone. Smoke curled from the chimney and several horses were hitched outside, suggesting other customers within. Harper and Quentin approached cautiously, alert for any sign of Turner or other ranch hands. "Wait here," Harper said, dismounting. "Joseph knows me. It might be better if I go in alone first." Quentin looked like he wanted to argue but nodded. "Be careful. If anything seems wrong, get out immediately." Harper adjusted her hat to better shadow her face and entered the trading post. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, smelling of leather, tobacco, and coffee. Several men stood at the counter, engaged in conversation with the proprietor, a tall man with graying hair pulled back in a neat braid. Harper hung back, pretending to examine a display of canned goods until the other customers completed their business and left. Only then did she approach the counter. "Joseph," she said quietly. The man looked up, surprise registering in his dark eyes as he recognized her. "Miss Jameson, it has been some time." "Yes, it has." Harper glanced around to ensure they were alone. "I need your help, Joseph. My friend and I require supplies, but we cannot return to town." Joseph's expression revealed nothing, but his eyes were shrewd. "Is this friend the man waiting outside with the horses?" Harper nodded. "His name is Quentin Wade. He worked for my father once." "And why can you not return to town, Miss Jameson?" Harper hesitated, then decided on honesty. "We found evidence that my father's ranch was stolen through fraud. The men responsible know we have it now and they're looking for us." Joseph considered this for a long moment. "Your father was a fair man," he said finally. "One of the few who treated my people with respect. What do you need?" Relief flooded through Harper. "Food for several days, ammunition, blankets, basic medical supplies. For where you are going, you will need more than that," Joseph said. "The mountains are unforgiving, especially as winter approaches." "We're heading to a property my father owned near Hawks Ridge," Harper explained. "We don't know what's there, if anything." Joseph nodded thoughtfully. "I know of this place. There is a small cabin built by miners some years ago. Your father purchased the claim when they moved on." He began gathering supplies, selecting items with practiced efficiency. "I will give you what you need, but you must be careful. Harding's influence extends far in this territory." "Thank you," Harper said, reaching for her purse. "How much do I owe you?" Joseph waved away her offer of payment. "Consider it a debt repaid. Your father helped my son when others would not. Now I help his daughter." Harper was touched by the man's generosity. "I won't forget this. See that you don't," Joseph said with the hint of a smile. "And perhaps, when justice is restored, you will remember who stood with you in difficult times." He packed their supplies into saddlebags and a small crate, then beckoned Quentin inside to help carry them. As they prepared to leave, Joseph handed Harper a folded map. "The cabin is here," he said, pointing to a marked location. "Follow the creek up the mountain. There is game to be hunted and water nearby. You should be safe there while you decide your next move." With their horses loaded with supplies, Harper and Quentin set off toward the mountains. The terrain grew steadily more rugged as they climbed, following game trails through dense pine forest. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered, and the temperature dropped noticeably. "Storm coming," Quentin observed, eyeing the sky. We should try to reach the cabin before it hits." They pushed on, the trail growing steeper and more treacherous. Just as the first fat raindrops began to fall, they crested a ridge and saw it a small log cabin nestled in a protected hollow, with a creek bubbling nearby. "There it is," Harper said, relief evident in her voice. They urged their tired horses forward, reaching the cabin just as the rain began in earnest. The structure was basic, but found a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow bed frame along one wall. Dust covered everything, but there was no sign of damage or wildlife intrusion. While Quentin tended to the horses in a lean-to shelter beside the cabin, Harper set about making the space habitable. She swept the floor with a bundle of pine branches, cleared cobwebs from the corners, and laid a fire in the fireplace. By the time Quentin returned, shaking rain from his hat, she had created a semblance of comfort in the rustic space. "Not bad," he remarked, looking around. "Your father chose well, defensible position close to water, hidden from casual observation. I wonder if he ever came here himself," Harper mused, lighting the fire. "He never mentioned it to me." "Maybe he was saving it," Quentin suggested, "for the future." The fire caught, sending warmth and light through the small cabin. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming on the roof and streaming down the single window. Harper unpacked food from their supplies: jerky, beans, coffee, and hardtack, while Quentin checked the perimeter once more. As night fell, they sat by the fire, a pot of beans simmering on the hearth. Harper had been studying her father's journal by firelight, making notes on a scrap of paper. "There's enough here to build a case," she said finally. Detailed records of the ranch's true financial state, notes about Harding's attempts to pressure my father into selling, even suspicions about the doctor who treated him. "The challenge will be finding someone to listen," Quentin said. "Harding has friends in high places." "Not in Denver," Harper pointed out. "The letter mentioned a lawyer there, James Whitfield. If we can reach him, show him what we've found." "It's a good plan," Quentin agreed. "But Harding will expect us to head for Denver. The roads will be watched." Harper sighed, closing the journal. "Then we wait. Let them think we've fled the territory. In a few days, when they've given up looking nearby, we can make our way to Denver." Quentin nodded, stirring the beans. "In the meantime, we're safe here, warm, dry, provisioned." As they ate their simple meal, Harper found herself studying Quentin in the firelight. There was something reassuring about his presence, a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. She realized how little she truly knew about him, despite having entrusted him with her safety and her future. "Why did you really come back to Willow Creek?" she asked, echoing her question from the previous day. "And don't tell me it was just to repay a debt to my father." Quentin set aside his plate, considering her for a long moment. "I did owe your father," he said finally, "but you're right, that's not the only reason." He rubbed a hand over his jaw, the stubble rasping beneath his fingers. "Truth is, I've spent 10 years drifting from outfit to outfit, town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. And what does that have to do with Willow Creek? Your father once told me something I never forgot. He said, a man needs 3 things to be content: work that satisfies him, land to call his own, and people who matter to him." Quentin's gaze held hers steadily. "I've had the work, but never the other 2. I came back thinking maybe it was time to change that." "By helping me reclaim my father's ranch?" Harper asked, still not understanding. "By settling somewhere that felt right," Quentin clarified. "Your situation just gave me a purpose while I figured out the rest." The honesty in his words touched Harper. She understood the restlessness he described. Though her body had remained in Willow Creek these past 3 years, her spirit had been adrift, untethered from everything that once gave her life meaning. "Well, I'm grateful you chose now to seek roots," she said softly. "I couldn't have done this alone." Quentin smiled, the expression warming his typically serious features. "Don't sell yourself short, Miss Jameson. From what I've seen, you're a force to be reckoned with." The compliment brought heat to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "Harper," she said. "I think after today you might as well call me Harper." "Harper," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Then you should call me Quentin." The rain continued through the night, punctuated occasionally by thunder that shook the small cabin. Harper lay awake on the narrow bed, having insisted Quentin take the bedroll near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her, her mind too full of the day's revelations and uncertainties about what lay ahead. The discovery that her father had likely been murdered changed everything. This was no longer just about reclaiming her property, it was about justice for a good man whose life had been cut short by greed. The thought both terrified and strengthened her. If Harding had gone to such lengths once, he wouldn't hesitate to do so again. Eventually, she drifted into a fitful sleep, dreaming of running through endless forests, always pursued, never quite reaching safety. She woke to the smell of coffee and the soft sound of movement. Morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, revealing Quentin stoking the fire. Outside, the rain had stopped, though water still dripped from the eaves. "Good morning," he said, noticing she was awake. "There's coffee if you want some." Harper sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. "How long have you been up?" "Couple hours. Checked the surroundings at first light." No sign of anyone following us yesterday. She accepted the tin cup he offered, savoring the bitter warmth. "What's the plan for today?" "We should explore the property," Quentin suggested. "Get a better sense of what's here, what can be used if we need to stay longer." After a breakfast of jerky and the last of the beans, they set out to survey their surroundings. The cabin sat in a small clearing, backed by steeper terrain to the west, and with the creek forming a natural boundary to the east. Game trails crisscrossed the area, and Quentin pointed out tracks of deer and smaller animals. "Good hunting," he observed. "And those berry bushes will have fruit, though it's late in the season." They followed the creek upstream, discovering a small waterfall cascading into a deep pool. Farther up, the remains of a mining operation were visible, a collapsed entrance to what had once been a shaft, rusted equipment scattered nearby. "Silver, most likely," Harper said, examining a piece of ore. "This whole region had silver fever a decade ago. Played out now," she shrugged. "Hard to say without proper equipment. Father might have bought it as speculation, or just for the water rights." They continued exploring, marking boundaries and noting resources. By midday, they had a reasonably complete picture of the property, approximately 40 acres of forested mountain terrain, with the cabin situated ideally for access to water and game. "Your father chose well," Quentin said as they rested by the creek. "This land has everything needed for self-sufficiency." "Except neighbors," Harper pointed out. "It's completely isolated. Some might consider that an advantage." Harper skimmed her fingers through the cold water. "Maybe. But I've had enough isolation these past 3 years, living among people who either pitied or resented me." Quentin was quiet for a moment. "What will you do if we succeed? If you get the ranch back?" It was a question Harper had asked herself many times since discovering her inheritance. "Rebuild," she said simply. "Make it what my father intended, a place that could be passed down through generations." "Alone," the word hung between them, layered with meaning Harper wasn't sure she was ready to examine. "I don't know," she admitted. "I never thought beyond the first step of reclaiming what was stolen." Quentin nodded, seeming to understand what she wasn't saying. "One step at a time, then." They returned to the cabin as afternoon shadows lengthened. Quentin set about repairing a loose shutter while Harper organized their supplies, calculating how long they could remain before needing to venture to a town. "We have enough food for a week, maybe more if we supplement with game," she reported. "Water isn't a concern, and firewood is plentiful." "Good," Quentin said, testing the repaired shutter. "That gives us time to let things settle before we make our move." Harper nodded, but her expression remained troubled. What if it's not enough? The journal, the deed, what if it's not enough to convince the authorities in Denver? Quentin considered this. "Your father mentioned sending evidence to the lawyer. If we can find Whitfield, see what he received. And if Harding got to him first, if the evidence is gone, then we find another way," Quentin said firmly. "We don't give up." His certainty was reassuring. Harper realized that in the short time she'd known him, Quentin had become a fixed point in her shifting world, steady, reliable, unwavering in his support. It was a novel experience after years of standing alone. That evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit Quentin had snared, conversation turned to lighter topics. Harper spoke of her childhood on the ranch, the freedom she'd felt roaming the land with her father. Quentin shared stories of his years on cattle drives, the characters he'd met, the territories he'd crossed. "Most beautiful country I ever saw was up in Montana," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Sky so big it makes you feel insignificant and important all at once." "Will you go back there someday?" Harper asked. Quentin shook his head. "Too cold for my liking. I prefer this country, mountains and valleys, forests and plains, variety." "Is that why you never settled? Always wanting something different?" "Partly," he admitted. "But mostly I think I was waiting to find the right place, somewhere that felt like it could be home." The word hung between them, resonant with shared understanding. Home wasn't just a structure or a piece of land, it was belonging, purpose, connection. "I hope you find it," Harper said softly. Quentin's gaze held hers across the small table. "I think I might be getting closer." The days that followed fell into a pattern. Mornings were spent hunting or foraging, afternoons devoted to improving the cabin or studying the journal for additional insights. Evenings brought conversation by the fire, the space between them gradually filling with shared confidences and cautious hopes. On the fourth day, while checking snares Quentin had set along the creek, they discovered fresh horse tracks that weren't their own. "Someone's been here," Quentin said, crouching to examine the prints. "Within the last few hours." Harper felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Harding's men, possibly, or just travelers passing through. He straightened, eyes scanning the surrounding forest. "Either way, we should be careful." They returned to the cabin by a circuitous route, approaching cautiously. Nothing seemed disturbed, but both felt the weight of knowing they were not as isolated as they had believed. "We should leave for Denver tomorrow," Harper decided as they secured the cabin for the night. "We've waited long enough. If someone is searching these mountains for us, it's only a matter of time before they find this place." Quentin agreed. "We'll leave at first light, take the long route to avoid the main roads." That night, Harper found sleep even more elusive than usual. Every sound from the forest seemed magnified: a branch creaking, an owl calling, the wind through pine needles. When she finally dozed, it was to dream again of pursuit, of running without escape. She woke suddenly, heart pounding, to find the cabin in darkness. The fire had burned down to embers, casting only the faintest glow. Something had disturbed her sleep, a sound that didn't belong. Then she heard it again, the soft nicker of a horse, not from the lean-to where their mounts were sheltered, but from somewhere closer to the cabin. "Quentin," she whispered urgently. He was already awake, she realized, a dark silhouette rising from his bedroll. He moved silently to the window, peering out into the night. "3 riders," he murmured, barely audible, "coming up the path." Harper slipped from the bed, pulling on her boots. How did they find us? Doesn't matter now. We need to go. Quentin was already gathering their essential supplies, the journal, the deed, ammunition for the rifle he'd taken from its place beside the door. Harper quickly donned her jacket and hat, stuffing a few items of food into her pockets. They had prepared for this possibility, discussing escape routes and rendezvous points. Now the practice would become reality. Out the back, Quentin directed, indicating the small window on the cabin's rear wall. Stay in the tree line, head for the waterfall. I'll meet you there with the horses if I can. And if you can't, his eyes met hers in the dim light. Then keep going. Follow the creek to where it joins the river, then east to Denver, find Whitfield. Harper wanted to argue, to insist they stay together, but she knew he was right. The evidence had to reach Denver with or without both of them. Be careful, she said instead. Quentin's hand briefly touched her cheek, the gesture so unexpected it stole her breath. You too. Harper slipped through the window, dropping silently to the ground outside. The night was clear, a half moon providing just enough light to navigate by. She kept to the shadows, moving swiftly toward the tree line as voices became audible from the front of the cabin. Check around back, she heard someone order. They might have run when they heard us coming. Harper froze behind a large pine as a figure rounded the cabin, lantern held high. The light swept the area, passing just feet from where she stood, her back pressed against rough bark, hardly daring to breathe. The man moved on, and Harper seized the opportunity to slip deeper into the forest. She followed a game trail she and Quentin had discovered, moving as quickly as she dared in the limited light. Behind her, shouts erupted. They had discovered the cabin empty. A gunshot cracked the night's stillness, then another. Harper's heart stuttered. Had they found Quentin? Was he hurt? The urge to turn back was almost overwhelming, but she forced herself onward. Trust him, she told herself. Trust the plan. The sound of the waterfall guided her through the darkness. Upon reaching it, she concealed herself in a hollow beneath the bank, where the water had eroded the soil beneath tree roots. From this vantage point, she could see anyone approaching while remaining hidden. Time passed with excruciating slowness. More shouts echoed through the forest, but no more gunshots. Harper strained to hear the sound of approaching horses, praying Quentin had managed to reach their mounts and escape. Just when she had begun to fear the worst, she heard the soft thud of hooves on the forest floor, moving with deliberate care rather than in flight. She tensed, ready to retreat deeper into her hiding place if necessary. Harper! Quentin's voice was barely audible above the waterfall's rush. She emerged cautiously, relief flooding through her at the sight of him leading both horses. Are you all right? I heard shots. They weren't aiming at me, he said grimly, helping her mount. They found blood from the rabbit I cleaned earlier, thought they'd wounded one of us. It bought me time to circle around to the horses. How many? 3 men, like I thought. Turner's not among them, but they're Harding's men for sure. He swung into his own saddle. We need to move fast. They'll realize their mistake soon enough. They set off along the creek, following its winding course downstream. The terrain was challenging in daylight. In darkness, it was treacherous. They were forced to move slowly, trusting their horses' sure-footedness more than their own vision. By dawn, they had reached the point where the creek joined a larger river. They paused to rest the horses and consider their options. If we follow the river east, we'll eventually hit the stage road to Denver, Harper said, consulting the map Joseph had given them. But that's the obvious route. They'll expect it. Quentin studied the map over her shoulder. What about this? He traced an alternate path with his finger. South through the high country, then east through Elkhorn Pass. Longer but less traveled. Harper nodded. It's a harder trail, especially with weather turning, but we'd be less likely to encounter Harding's men. Or anyone who might recognize us, Quentin added. Decision made then, south it is. They altered their course, leaving the relative ease of the river valley for the more challenging terrain of the high country. The day was clear but cold, with a brisk wind that carried the promise of winter. As they climbed, pine forest gave way to more open landscapes, meadows dotted with aspen groves, their leaves golden in the autumn light. By midday, they had gained enough elevation to look back over the territory they had traversed. In the far distance, the valley where Willow Creek lay was just visible, a patchwork of farmland and rangeland. Strange to think it's all still there, Harper mused. People going about their business unaware of what's happened, or complicit in it, Quentin pointed out. Harding wouldn't have been able to do what he did without help. The thought sobered her. How many in town had known or suspected the truth about her father's death and the theft of his property? How many had turned a blind eye out of fear or self-interest? They continued their journey through the afternoon, making good progress despite the difficult terrain. As evening approached, they found a sheltered spot to make camp, a hollow between rock formations that would hide their fire from distant observation. While Harper prepared a meal from their dwindling supplies, Quentin tended the horses and secured the perimeter. When he returned, his expression was troubled. "What is it?" Harper asked, recognizing the tension in his posture. "Not sure," he admitted. "Just a feeling, might be nothing." But later, as they sat by the small fire, both heard the distant sound of horses moving through the forest below their position. "Could be anyone," Harper whispered, though she didn't believe it. Quentin shook his head. "They're following our trail. Must have picked it up where we left the creek. What do we do? Keep going. We have the advantage of height and darkness." He began quickly packing their belongings. "If we travel through the night, we can increase our lead." It was a grueling night. The moon was obscured by clouds that had moved in after sunset, forcing them to navigate by instinct more than sight. The temperature dropped steadily, and a light snow began to fall, further complicating their journey but also covering their tracks. By morning, they had reached Elkhorn, past a narrow gap between towering rock formations that marked the easiest route through the final mountain ridge before the eastern plains. Beyond it lay easier terrain and, eventually, Denver. They paused at the pass entrance, both horses and riders exhausted from the night's journey. The snow had intensified, reducing visibility and making the trail treacherous. "We should rest," Harper said, noting Quentin's pallor. He had given her his heavier coat during the night when he'd noticed her shivering, and now he was paying the price. "Not here," he insisted. "Too exposed. If we can make it through the pass, there's a line shack on the other side, used by cattlemen driving herds to market." Harper was reluctant, but she could see the wisdom in his suggestion. The pass was indeed vulnerable, a perfect place for an ambush. "All right," she agreed. "But then we rest properly." The passage through Elkhorn was nerve-wracking. The trail narrowed to barely the width of a horse in places, with sheer rock faces rising on one side and steep drops on the other. The snow made footing uncertain, and several times they were forced to dismount and lead the horses through particularly treacherous sections. When they finally emerged on the eastern side, the landscape opened dramatically before them. The plains stretched toward the horizon, currently obscured by the continuing snowfall. As Quentin had promised, a small structure was visible about a half-mile from the pass exit, a basic line shack built to shelter cowboys during cattle drives. They approached cautiously, but the shack appeared deserted. It was even more rudimentary than the cabin they had left behind, a single room with a small fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and pallets for sleeping. but it was shelter from the intensifying storm, and at this point, that was all that mattered. While Quentin tended to the horses in the attached lean-to, Harper set about making the shack habitable. There was a small supply of firewood stacked beside the fireplace, and she soon had a fire burning. She found a few basic supplies in a cupboard: coffee, beans, salt left by previous occupants for those who would follow, a common practice in the remote wilderness. When Quentin finally joined her, stomping snow from his boots, his face was alarmingly pale beneath his weathered tan. "You should rest," Harper said, taking his arm and guiding him to one of the pallets she had prepared. For once, he didn't argue, which worried her more than anything else. As he stretched out, she could see he was shivering despite the fire's warmth. "You're ill," she said, pressing a hand to his forehead. His skin was hot to the touch, belying his chills. "Just tired," he insisted. "Need a few hours' sleep." But Harper knew better. She had seen this before: the rapid onset of mountain fever, which could strike even the hardiest individuals when they pushed beyond their limits in harsh conditions. Her father had suffered from it once, after a particularly difficult roundup in similar weather. She helped Quentin remove his wet outer clothing and boots, then covered him with every blanket they had. The fever would need to run its course. There was little else she could do without medicine. But she could keep him warm and hydrated, and hope his strong constitution would do the rest. Throughout the day, the storm raged outside while Harper tended to Quentin. His condition worsened by evening, the fever climbing higher. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking clearly, other times muttering incoherently. During one lucid moment, he gripped her hand. "If I don't improve by morning," he said, his voice raspy, "you need to go on without me. Take the journal, find Whitfield." "I'm not leaving you," Harper replied firmly. "You must," he insisted. "What we discovered, it's bigger than either of us. Your father deserves justice." "So do you," she countered. "For risking everything to help me. We continue together or not at all." He seemed about to argue further, but a coughing fit overtook him, and when it passed, he had slipped back into restless sleep. Harper maintained her vigil through the night, applying cold compresses to his forehead and ensuring he drank water whenever he woke. Outside, the storm gradually diminished, the howling wind giving way to the soft silence of falling snow. By dawn, Harper was exhausted but determined. Quentin's fever seemed no worse, but no better either. She needed supplies: medicine, food, proper blankets. The map showed a small settlement about 10 miles east, likely just a trading post and a few buildings, but it would have what they needed. The decision was difficult but necessary. She would ride to the settlement, purchase supplies, and return as quickly as possible. Quentin was in no condition to travel, and delaying treatment might prove fatal. She prepared carefully, ensuring Quentin was as comfortable as possible before her departure. She left water and food within easy reach, built up the fire, and made sure he understood she would return by nightfall. "Be careful," he managed, his eyes clearer than they had been since the fever began. "Harding's reach is long." "I'll be cautious," she promised. "Just focus on resting." The world outside was transformed by the storm. Several inches of fresh snow blanketed the landscape, and the sky was a brilliant blue, the air crystalline in its clarity. Under different circumstances, Harper would have found it beautiful. Now, she saw only the challenge it presented. Tracks in fresh snow would be easy to follow. She chose a circuitous route, avoiding the most direct path to the settlement in case Harding's men had continued their pursuit. The going was slow, the snow deep in places where it had drifted. By mid-morning, she had covered perhaps half the distance to her destination. It was then that she spotted them: 3 riders on a ridge to the north, silhouetted against the sky. They appeared to be scanning the terrain, and Harper quickly guided her horse into a copse of trees, hoping she hadn't been seen from her concealed position. She watched as the riders conferred, then split up, one continuing along the ridge, two descending toward the plain she had been crossing. They were searching methodically, and it was only a matter of time before they found tracks leading to the line shack. Harper's mind raced. She couldn't lead them back to Quentin in his vulnerable state, nor could she abandon her mission to obtain supplies he desperately needed. Her only option was to draw them away to become the prey that led the hunters far from their true quarry. It was risky, perhaps foolhardy, but she saw no alternative. She waited until the riders had descended fully into the plain, then emerged from her hiding place, making sure they caught sight of her before spurring her horse into a gallop eastward. The ruse worked. With shouts that carried clearly in the cold air, the men changed course to pursue her. Harper pushed her mount hard, heading not toward the settlement but southeast, away from both it and the line shack. If she could lead them far enough away, lose them in the rolling terrain, she might be able to circle back to complete her original mission. For over an hour, the chase continued. Harper used every trick she knew, crossing streams where the water still ran, doubling back briefly to confuse her trail, using rocky ground where hoofprints wouldn't show. The men were persistent, but she had the advantage of desperation and intimate knowledge of frontier survival tactics her father had taught her. Eventually, she lost sight of her pursuers. Whether she had truly eluded them, or they had simply fallen too far behind to be visible, she couldn't be certain. But she had to assume she'd gained at least a temporary reprieve. Consulting her mental map, Harper altered course toward the settlement. She had lost precious time and distance with her diversion, and her horse was tiring rapidly. She would need to pace the animal carefully to reach her destination. It was mid-afternoon when she finally crested a small rise and saw a cluster of buildings beside a creek, smoke rising from chimneys. The settlement was smaller than she had hoped, little more than a trading post, a stable, and what appeared to be a combination saloon and boarding house. But it would have what she needed. Harper approached cautiously, alert for any sign of Harding's men. The settlement seemed peaceful, with only a few horses hitched outside the buildings. She dismounted at the trading post, her legs stiff and aching from the long ride. The interior was warm and smelled of tobacco, coffee, and leather. An elderly man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter as she entered. "Afternoon, miss," he greeted her. "Don't get many travelers this time of year, especially not alone." Harper had prepared her story on the ride. "My husband and I were crossing to Denver when he fell ill," she explained. "We've taken shelter in a line shack west of here. I need medicine, food, blankets." The shopkeeper nodded sympathetically. "Mountain fever, I'd wager. Seen it plenty. Got some willow bark that'll help with the fever, and some other remedies my wife puts together." He began gathering supplies as Harper listed what she needed. As he worked, Harper became aware of voices outside, men's voices, loud and agitated. Her heart sank as she recognized one of them, Frank Turner, Harding's foreman. "Seen a woman come through here?" he was asking someone. "Young, traveling alone." Harper turned to the shopkeeper, who had also heard the voices. "Please," she whispered urgently. "Those men mean me harm." "Is there another way out?" The old man studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Back room. Window leads to the creek. Take what you need, leave the money on the counter." "Thank you," Harper said fervently, gathering the supplies into her saddlebags. She placed more than the required amount on the counter. "One more thing," the shopkeeper said, reaching beneath the counter. He produced a small revolver. "Belonged to my son. Passed last winter, take it." Harper accepted the weapon gratefully, tucking it into her coat pocket as voices grew louder outside. She slipped into the back room just as the front door opened. The window was small but manageable. Harper squeezed through, dropping quietly to the ground beside the creek that ran behind the building. She could hear Turner questioning the shopkeeper, his tone growing increasingly aggressive. "I'm telling you, no one's come in today except old Bill Johnson for his tobacco," the shopkeeper insisted, his voice carrying through the thin walls. Harper didn't wait to hear more. Staying low, she followed the creek away from the settlement, using the bank for cover. Her horse was still hitched in front of the trading post, but there was no way to retrieve it without being seen. She would have to continue on foot, at least until she could find another mount. The trek back to the line shack would be arduous, nearly 10 miles through snow, carrying supplies, with night approaching and pursuers potentially on her trail. But Quentin's life depended on her return, and Harper refused to contemplate failure. She had covered perhaps 2 miles, the settlement no longer visible behind her, when she heard hoofbeats. Ducking behind a fallen tree, she watched as a lone rider approached along the creek, not one of Turner's men, but a young boy, perhaps 15 or 16, leading a second horse laden with firewood. It was a risk, but one she had to take. As the boy drew near, Harper stepped into view, hands raised to show she meant no harm. The boy reined his horse sharply, startled by her sudden appearance. "Please," Harper said quickly. "I need help. There are men after me, bad men. I need to get back to my friend who's sick." The boy regarded her suspiciously. "Why they after you?" "Because we discovered something they want to keep hidden," Harper explained, deciding honesty was her best approach. "They stole my father's ranch after he died, and we found proof." Something in her tone or expression must have convinced him, for the boy's posture relaxed slightly. "Whereabouts you need to get to?" "A line shack about 8 miles west of here. My friend has mountain fever. I have medicine, but I need to reach him before nightfall." The boy was silent for a moment, considering. Then he nodded toward the pack horse. "Pa won't miss Daisy till morning. Take her. Creek follows pretty close to the shack if it's the one I'm thinking. Stay in the water when you can to hide your tracks." Harper could have wept with relief. "Thank you." "What's your name?" "Samuel," the boy replied. "Samuel Crane." "I'll return your horse when I can, Samuel. I promise." The boy helped her transfer her supplies to Daisy and gave her brief instructions on the mare's temperament. "She's steady but not fast," he warned. "And watch out for those men. They came through earlier, asking questions. Mean-looking bunch." With renewed determination, Harper set off westward, following the creek as Samuel had suggested. The mare was indeed steady, picking her way carefully through the snow-covered terrain. Harper pushed the pace as much as she dared, conscious of the lowering sun and the miles still to cover. Twilight was settling over the landscape when she finally spotted the line shack in the distance. There was no smoke rising from the chimney, which worried her had the fire gone out. Was Quentin too weak to tend it? As she approached, Harper scanned the area for signs of intruders but saw nothing amiss. She dismounted quickly, securing the mare in the lean-to beside Quentin's horse, which nickered softly in recognition. "Quentin." She called softly as she entered the shack, her arms full of supplies. The interior was dim and cooler than she'd left it, the fire reduced to embers. Quentin lay where she had left him, but as she approached, she could see he was awake, his eyes reflecting the faint glow from the fireplace. "You came back," he said, his voice barely audible. "Of course I did," Harper replied, dropping to her knees beside him. She touched his forehead, still burning with fever. "I have medicine, food, more blankets." She worked quickly, rebuilding the fire and preparing the willow bark tea the shopkeeper had recommended. When it was ready, She helped Quentin sit up enough to drink it, supporting his head with her arm. "What happened?" he asked, noticing the unfamiliar revolver she had placed on the table. "You're trembling." Harper briefly recounted her encounter with Turner's men and her escape from the settlement. "They're searching the area systematically," she concluded. "It's only a matter of time before they find this place." Quentin's gaze sharpened despite his illness. "Then we need to move on as soon as possible." "Not until you're stronger," Harper insisted. "The medicine should help reduce the fever by morning. Then we can discuss our next steps." She prepared a simple meal of broth and bread, coaxing Quentin to eat what he could. Afterward, she tended to the horses, ensuring they were fed and comfortable for the night. Only when all necessary tasks were complete did she allow herself to rest, settling onto the pallet beside Quentin's with the revolver close at hand. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every sound from outside the creak of branches, the soft fall of snow from overladen boughs jolted her to alertness. When she did doze, it was to dream of pursuit, of Turner's men closing in as she struggled through endless snow. She woke before dawn to find Quentin watching her, his eyes clearer than they had been since the fever began. "Your fever's broken," she said, touching his forehead with relief. He nodded. "The medicine helped. So did knowing you'd risked everything to bring it back." Harper busied herself preparing more of the willow bark tea, oddly flustered by the intensity of his gaze. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Quentin said quietly. "They wouldn't have. Most would have continued to Denver alone, especially knowing Turner's men were searching for them." She handed him the cup, avoiding his eyes. "Well, I'm not most people." "No," he agreed. "You're not." The simple statement carried a weight that hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Harper felt something shift in her understanding of their relationship, no longer just allies in a common cause, but something more complex and potentially more profound. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of voices. Harper moved quickly to the window, peering out into the pre-dawn gloom. 3 riders were approaching from the east, still some distance away but clearly heading toward the shack. "Turner's men," she said grimly. "They must have found our trail." Quentin pushed himself up, wincing at the effort. "We need to go, now." "You're not strong enough, no choice," he cut her off. "Help me up." Against her better judgment, Harper helped him dress and gather their essential belongings: the journal, the deed, the remaining supplies. Quentin was weak but determined, and with her support, he managed to reach the lean to where the horses waited. "Can you ride?" she asked doubtfully, noting his pallor. "Have to," he replied simply, "but not far. I have an idea." He pointed westward toward a ridge visible in the growing light. "The other side of that ridge drops into a canyon. There's an old trapper's cabin tucked against the cliff face, nearly impossible to spot unless you know it's there." "How do you know about it?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Spent a winter there once, few years back. Bad storm caught me crossing the mountains. Found it by accident, stayed till spring. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than trying to outrun their pursuers across open country with Quentin barely able to stay in the saddle." They mounted quickly, Quentin grimacing with the effort, and set off toward the ridge. The going was slow. The snow had crusted overnight, breaking beneath the horses' hooves with sounds that seemed unnaturally loud in the still morning air. Behind them, the voices grew closer, punctuated occasionally by shouts as their trail was discovered. "They're gaining," Harper said as they reached the base of the ridge. The climb ahead looked formidable, the slope steep and rocky beneath its covering of snow. "Let's separate," Quentin suggested. "You go ahead, find the cabin. I'll lead them away, then circle back." "Absolutely not," Harper refused. "You can barely stay mounted as it is. We stay together." Before he could argue, she dismounted and took the reins of both horses. "We'll lead them up. It's safer for the horses and quieter." The ascent was grueling. Each step required careful placement to avoid slipping on hidden ice or loose rock. Harper led the way, choosing the path while maintaining a grip on both sets of reins. Quentin followed, using his rifle as a walking staff, his breathing labored but steady. They were perhaps halfway up when a shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off rock near Harper's head. She ducked instinctively, pulling the horses down with her behind an outcropping. "They've spotted us," Quentin said unnecessarily, positioning himself at the edge of their cover to return fire. His shot was carefully aimed, not at the men but at the ground near their horses, causing the animals to rear and momentarily disrupt the pursuit. "Go," he urged Harper. "Continue up. I'll cover you." This time she didn't argue. Leading the horses as quickly as she dared, Harper continued the ascent while Quentin fired occasionally to keep their pursuers at bay. The ridge top seemed impossibly distant, but step by step, they gained ground. When they finally reached the summit, Harper's legs were trembling with exertion, and Quentin's face was ashen beneath its stubble. But there was no time to rest. On the western side, the ridge did indeed drop away into a steep canyon, just as Quentin had described. And there, tucked against the cliff face about halfway down, was a small cabin, its presence betrayed only by a thin wisp of smoke from its chimney. "Someone's there," Harper said, alarmed. "Good," Quentin replied unexpectedly. "Means there's a fire." They began the descent, even more treacherous than the climb had been. Behind them, their pursuers had reached the ridge top and resumed firing, though the distance made accuracy impossible. As they neared the cabin, its door opened, and a figure stepped out, an elderly man with a long white beard, a rifle held casually in his arms. "That you, Wade?" he called up. "Thought I recognized your shooting." "MacGregor," Quentin called back. "Need shelter, men after us." The old man squinted up at the ridge top, where Turner's men were visible against the sky. "Well, come on then. Ain't getting any younger standing out here." The cabin was small but immaculately maintained, with a cheerful fire burning in the hearth and the smell of coffee in the air. MacGregor helped them settle Quentin by the fire, then went to tend to the horses. "Old trapper," Quentin explained to Harper. "Known him for years. If anyone can keep us hidden, it's Angus MacGregor." The old man returned, stomping snow from his boots. "Them fellows don't look like they're planning to give up easy," he observed, peering out a small window. "Searching for a way down that won't break their fool necks." "They won't find it unless they know the trail," Quentin said. MacGregor nodded. "And only a handful of us do." He turned his sharp blue eyes to Harper. "Now, suppose you tell me why 3 armed men are so intent on catching you two that they'd risk the north face of Widow's Ridge in winter." Harper glanced at Quentin, who nodded encouragingly. She told their story, from the theft of her father's ranch to the discovery of his hidden records, their flight through the mountains, and Quentin's illness. MacGregor listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if confirming something to himself. "Wallace Harding," he said when she had finished. "Should have known. Man's been poisoning this territory for years. Ran more than one honest rancher out of business with his underhanded tactics." "You know him?" Harper asked. "Know of him," MacGregor clarified. "Enough to steer clear. Man's got connections in territorial government, uses them to get what he wants." He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "But murder, that's a step beyond even what I'd have expected." "We have proof," Harper said, "or at least enough to warrant a proper investigation. If we can reach Denver, find the lawyer my father was working with." "Denver's still a fair piece from here," MacGregor pointed out. "And your friend there isn't fit for travel just yet." He jerked his head toward Quentin, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep by the fire. "We don't have much choice," Harper said. "Turner's men won't give up, and the longer we delay, the more time Harding has to cover his tracks." MacGregor considered this. "There's a settlement about a day's ride from here, Cooperville. Small, but they've got a telegraph office. Could get word to your lawyer in Denver that way." Hope surged in Harper's chest. "Could you take me there?" The old man nodded. "Reckon I could. Been meaning to stock up on supplies anyway." He glanced at Quentin. "He should stay here, regain his strength. Place is defensible, and those fellows up top aren't likely to find it even if they keep searching." It was the most sensible plan, but Harper was reluctant to leave Quentin again, especially after his close call with the fever. As if sensing her thoughts, MacGregor added, "I've nursed more than one man through mountain fever in my time. He'll be fine for a day." Eventually, Harper agreed. They would rest for the remainder of the day, allowing Quentin to regain some strength and giving Turner's men time to potentially abandon their search. Then, at first light, Harper would accompany MacGregor to Cooperville to send a telegraph to Whitfield in Denver. The day passed quietly in the snug cabin. MacGregor proved to be an excellent cook, preparing a hearty stew from smoked venison and dried vegetables that did more to revive Quentin than any medicine could have. By evening, he was able to sit up and participate in conversation, though he still tired quickly. As darkness fell, MacGregor excused himself to make a final check on the horses and the surrounding area. Alone with Quentin for the first time since their escape from the line shack, Harper felt an unexpected shyness. "Thank you," Quentin said into the silence, "for everything. Most people would have left me behind." Harper shook her head. "I told you before I couldn't do that. Because you needed me to help with your father's case." There was something in his tone, a question beneath the question. "No," Harper said honestly, "because I couldn't bear to lose you too." The admission hung between them, more revealing than she had intended. Quentin reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "When this is over," he said quietly, "when you have your ranch back and your father's name is cleared." "What then, Harper?" It was the question she had been avoiding since they had found the journal. What came after justice? What would she do with the life that had been on hold for 3 years? "I don't know," she admitted. "Rebuild, I suppose, make the ranch what it was meant to be." Alone, there it was again, that word with its layers of meaning. Harper looked at their joined hands, then up at Quentin's face, shadowed in the firelight. "That depends," she said softly. "On what?" "On whether someone might want to build it with me." Quentin's eyes held hers, the intensity in them unmistakable even in the dim light. "Harper," he began, his voice rough with emotion. The door opened as MacGregor returned, and they drew apart, the moment interrupted but not forgotten. The old man gave them a knowing look but made no comment as he settled into his chair and began cleaning his rifle. "All quiet out there," he reported. "Your pursuers seem to have made camp up on the ridge. They'll be cold and miserable by morning, might even give up and head back to report failure." "You don't know Frank Turner," Harper said grimly. "He doesn't give up easily, especially when Harding's involved." "Well, they won't find this place," MacGregor said confidently, "and we'll be long gone before they figure out they've been outwitted." The plan was set. Harper and MacGregor would leave at first light for Cooperville, while Quentin would remain at the cabin to recover his strength. If all went well, they would return the following day with news that Whitfield had been contacted and was taking action. As they prepared for sleep, Quentin beckoned Harper to his side once more. "Be careful," he said, his voice low to avoid MacGregor's hearing. "Trust MacGregor but no one else, and if there's any sign of trouble—" "I know," she assured him. "I'll be cautious." He caught her hand again, his grip firmer than before. "We have unfinished business, Harper Jameson." The warmth in his eyes made her heart skip. "Yes," she agreed softly. "We do." Morning came clear and cold with no sign of new snow. MacGregor was already up when Harper woke, preparing coffee and a simple breakfast. Quentin was still sleeping, his breathing deep and regular, a good sign that his recovery was progressing. "Let him rest," MacGregor advised when Harper moved to wake him for goodbyes. "We'll be back before he knows we're gone." They set out as the first light touched the canyon walls, following a narrow trail that zigzagged down to the canyon floor. MacGregor led the way, his knowledge of the terrain evident in the confident manner he navigated seemingly invisible paths. "Been living in these mountains for 30 years, he told Harper as they reached the bottom and turned eastward. "Know every trail, every pass, every hidden valley. That's how I've survived knowing things others don't." "Including Quentin," Harper observed. MacGregor chuckled. "Wade and I go back a ways. Met him when he was just a youngster, not much older than you are now. Had a wildness to him then, always searching for something he couldn't name." The old man glanced at her. "Seems different now, more settled in himself." Harper wasn't sure how to respond to this assessment. Had Quentin changed in the short time she'd known him, or was it simply that she was seeing a side of him that emerged only in certain circumstances? They rode through the day, stopping briefly at noon to rest the horses and eat a cold meal. The terrain gradually became less rugged as they left the mountains behind, transitioning to rolling foothills. By late afternoon, they could see Cooperville in the distance, a small cluster of buildings beside a river. "Not much to look at," MacGregor admitted, "but they've got the essentials: general store, telegraph office, even a decent meal at the boarding house if you're not too particular." As they rode into town, Harper was struck by how ordinary it seemed. People went about their business, nodding greetings to MacGregor, who was evidently a familiar figure. No one gave Harper a second glance, just another traveler passing through. After days of fear and pursuit, the normalcy was almost disorienting. Their first stop was the telegraph office, a small building attached to the general store. Harper had composed her message carefully during the ride, brief, but containing enough information to alert Whitfield to their situation without revealing too much, should the telegram fall into the wrong hands. James Whitfield, attorney, Denver, stop daughter of Thomas Jameson with evidence regarding father's death and property seizure, stop in danger, stop seeking protection and legal counsel, stop reply to H. Jameson, Cooperville Telegraph Office, stop. The telegraph operator, a young man with ink-stained fingers, assured her that the message would be sent immediately and any reply would be held for her collection. "How long might a response take?" Harper asked. "Depends," the operator replied. "If the recipient is available when it arrives, could be within hours. If not, might be tomorrow or the next day." This was the part of the plan Harper liked least, waiting for a response from a man she had never met, who might not even be in Denver, or might have already been compromised by Harding. But there was no alternative if they wanted legal support for their case. With the telegram sent, they crossed to the general store to purchase supplies. MacGregor seemed to know exactly what was needed, efficiently selecting items while Harper browsed, maintaining the appearance of a casual shopper while remaining alert for any sign of Turner's men. "We'll stay at the boarding house tonight," MacGregor decided as they completed their purchases. "Good food, clean beds, and the proprietress is an old friend who won't ask too many questions." The boarding house was a 2-story structure with a wide porch and curtained windows that gave it a homey appearance. The proprietress, a robust woman named Mrs. Larson, greeted MacGregor with genuine warmth. Angus MacGregor thought you'd hibernated for the winter already. Not quite yet, Eliza, he replied with a smile. Need a couple of rooms for the night. My friend here is waiting on a telegram from Denver. Mrs. Larson eyed Harper with friendly curiosity. Of course, just you two. For now, MacGregor said vaguely. Might have another joining us tomorrow. This seemed to satisfy the woman, who showed them to adjacent rooms on the second floor. Harper's was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and window overlooking the main street. After days in the wilderness, it seemed luxurious. They ate dinner in the boarding house dining room, sharing a table with two traveling salesmen who dominated the conversation with tales of their journeys. Harper was content to listen, the normalcy of the scene a welcome respite from the tension of the past days. After dinner, MacGregor announced his intention to visit an old friend at the saloon across the street. Need to catch up on local news, he explained to Harper. Might learn something useful. Alone in her room, Harper felt the weight of exhaustion settle over her. She hadn't truly rested since before discovering her father's journal, always alert for danger, always planning their next move. Now, with a locked door between her and the world, she allowed herself to relax slightly. She thought of Quentin, alone in the cabin, hopefully continuing his recovery. The memory of their last conversation brought warmth to her cheeks. Unfinished business, he had said, and she knew he hadn't been referring to her father's case, when had her feelings for him shifted from cautious alliance to something deeper. Perhaps it had been gradual, built from moments of shared danger and quiet conversation. Or perhaps it had been there from the beginning, when he had stood in the saloon doorway and declared that anyone who didn't want Harper had missed their chance. A knock at her door jolted her from these reflections. Caution immediately reasserted itself, and she reached for the revolver before approaching the door. "Who is it?" she called. "Telegraph boy, madam," came a youthful voice. "Got a message for H. Jameson." Harper opened the door a crack, confirming it was indeed a young boy in a telegraph office cap before accepting the envelope he held out. "Any reply, madam?" the boy asked. "Not yet. Thank you." Alone again, Harper tore open the envelope with trembling fingers. The message was brief but clear. H. Jameson stop message received. Stop remain where you are. Stop arriving tomorrow noon. Stage with Marshall. Stop Whitfield. Stop relief washed over her. Whitfield was coming himself, bringing a marshal, presumably a federal one, beyond Harding's influence. They would arrive tomorrow, hear the evidence, and take official action. The end of their ordeal was in sight. Harper was about to go find MacGregor to share the news when another knock came at her door. This one was firmer, more authoritative. "Miss Jameson, it's Sheriff Brody from Willow Creek. Need to speak with you." Her blood ran cold. Sheriff Brody, the man Quentin had identified as being in Harding's pocket. How had he found her? And why was he in Cooperville, a town well outside his jurisdiction? "Miss Jameson, I know you're in there." Mrs. Larson confirmed it. Harper's mind raced. She couldn't open the door. Brody would arrest her on some trumped-up charge and return her to Harding before Whitfield arrived. But she couldn't stay barricaded in the room indefinitely either. "Give me a moment, Sheriff," she called, playing for time. "I'm not properly dressed." She moved quickly to the window, throwing it open and looking down. There was a narrow ledge running along the building's facade, and below that, the porch roof extended far enough that she might be able to drop to it safely. "Miss Jameson," Brody's voice had taken on an edge of impatience. "I don't have all night." Harper climbed out onto the ledge, her heart pounding as she carefully closed the window behind her. The night air was bitter cold, and the ledge narrower than it had appeared from inside. Pressing her back against the clapboard siding, she inched along toward the corner of the building, hoping to reach a drain pipe she had noticed earlier. Behind her, She could hear the door being forced open, followed by Brody's curse when he discovered the room empty. She moved faster, abandoning caution for speed. When she reached the drain pipe, she grasped it firmly and used it to lower herself to the porch roof. From there, it was a relatively simple matter to drop to the ground in the alley beside the boarding house. Harper didn't wait to see if she had been spotted. She ran, keeping to shadows, heading for the saloon where MacGregor had gone. The establishment was crowded and noisy, making it easy for Harper to slip inside unnoticed. She spotted MacGregor at a corner table, deep in conversation with a weathered man in a railroad worker's clothes. Keeping her head down, she made her way to their table. "Angus," she said urgently, "we have a problem." MacGregor looked up, his expression changing as he took in her disheveled appearance and evident alarm. "What's happened?" "Sheriff Brody from Willow Creek is here, looking for me. I climbed out the window to escape." The old man nodded to his companion, who stood without a word and made his way to the bar, creating a small disturbance that drew attention away from their corner. "How did he find you?" MacGregor asked, his voice low. "I don't know, but we need to leave now. Whitfield is coming on tomorrow's noon stage with a marshal. We just need to stay free until then." MacGregor considered this. "Horses are at the livery. Too risky to retrieve them with Brody looking for you." He thought for a moment. "My friend there works for the railroad. There's a freight train stopping here for water in about an hour, heading east toward Denver. We could catch it, be halfway to meeting Whitfield by morning." It wasn't ideal, but it was better than trying to evade Brody in a town this small until noon tomorrow. "What about our supplies? Our horses?" "Can't be helped," MacGregor said pragmatically. "Life's worth more than possessions." Harper nodded reluctantly. "And Quentin? We were supposed to return tomorrow." "He's safe where he is," MacGregor assured her. "Has supplies for several days. Once we've met Whitfield and the marshal, we can return for him with proper protection." The plan made sense, but Harper hated the thought of Quentin waiting in vain for their return, perhaps even venturing out to look for them if they were delayed too long. Still, their priority had to be preserving the evidence and ensuring Whitfield received it. "All right," she agreed. "How do we get to the train without being seen?" MacGregor's friend returned to the table, leaning down to speak quietly. "Sheriff's got men watching the streets. Looking for a young woman, says she's wanted for theft back in Willow Creek." "A convenient charge," Harper said bitterly. "Easily fabricated, impossible to disprove on the spot." "Need a distraction," MacGregor mused. He glanced around the saloon, then smiled slightly. "And I think I know just the thing." What followed was a masterclass in creating chaos. MacGregor whispered to his friend, who approached a group of miners at another table. Words were exchanged, accusations made, and within minutes, a full-scale brawl had erupted. As patrons either joined in or fled to avoid involvement, MacGregor led Harper out through the kitchen, where a sympathetic cook pointed them toward a back exit. "Railroad yards that way," MacGregor said, pointing east. "Stay in the shadows, move quickly, but don't run. Running draws attention." They made their way through the darkened town, avoiding the main streets where Brody's men were visible, questioning people and checking buildings. The railroad yard was on the eastern edge of town, a collection of sidings, water towers, and small maintenance buildings alongside the main track. MacGregor's friend had told them to look for a freight train with a distinctive red caboose. They found it easily enough, currently taking on water while the crew took a brief rest. "Freight cars will be locked," MacGregor said, studying the train. "But there's usually a space between cargo where a person could hide if they're not too particular about comfort." They approached cautiously, waiting until the crew members were occupied before slipping between cars. MacGregor found what he was looking for: a partially filled car carrying lumber. There was space between the stacked boards and the car's roof, just enough for two people to lie flat. "Not comfortable," he acknowledged, "but it'll get us to the next proper station. From there, we can catch a passenger train the rest of the way to meet Whitfield." Harper climbed in first, squeezing into the narrow space. The rough wood pressed against her back, and the air was heavy with the smell of pine sap. MacGregor followed, settling beside her just as voices approached the crew, preparing to depart. "Be still now," MacGregor whispered. "They sometimes check for hobos before leaving." Harper held her breath as footsteps passed their hiding place. A lantern briefly illuminated part of the car, but the light didn't reach their concealed position. The footsteps continued on, and moments later they felt the jolt as the train began to move. "We made it," Harper whispered, relief flooding through her. "For now," MacGregor cautioned. "Still a long way to go." The journey was as uncomfortable as MacGregor had predicted. The lumber shifted slightly with the train's movement, sometimes pressing painfully against them. The night air grew colder as they picked up speed, whistling through cracks in the car's walls. Unable to move freely or even sit up, they endured in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Harper's mind returned repeatedly to Quentin, alone in the cabin. Had Turner's men given up their search? Would he be safe until they could return for him? And what of the unfinished business between them? Would they have the chance to explore what had begun to grow amid danger and uncertainty? Sometime in the early hours of morning, the train began to slow. MacGregor stirred beside her. "Approaching a station," he murmured. "We should prepare to disembark before they start unloading." As the train ground to a halt, they carefully extracted themselves from their hiding place. Harper's limbs were stiff and aching from the confined position, and she stumbled slightly as she climbed down from the car. MacGregor steadied her, then led the way away from the tracks toward the small station building. The town was larger than Cooperville, with several streets of businesses and homes visible in the pre-dawn light. A sign on the station identified it as Riverdale, a name Harper recognized as being about 20 miles east of Denver. "Good fortune," MacGregor said, studying a schedule posted on the station wall. "Passenger train to Denver leaves in 2 hours. We'll be there well before noon." With time to spare, and both of them stiff and cold from the night's journey, they sought out a small cafe that had just opened for the day. The warmth inside was welcome, as was the hot coffee and breakfast the sleepy-eyed proprietor served them. "You look like you've had a rough night," the man commented as he refilled their cups. "Train travel ain't what it used to be," MacGregor replied with a wink, letting the man draw his own conclusions. As they ate, Harper considered their next steps. "We should send a telegram to Whitfield. Let him know we're coming to Denver instead of waiting in Cooperville." MacGregor nodded. "Good thinking. Brody's likely discovered your escape by now, might even guess we took the freight train. He could telegraph ahead to Denver." The telegraph office wouldn't open for another hour, so they lingered in the cafe, Harper watching the street through the window for any sign of pursuit. The town was coming to life as dawn broke, fully shopkeepers opening their businesses, early workers heading to jobs, a few children running errands before school. It all seemed so normal, so disconnected from the life and death struggle that had consumed her world for the past week. Harper found herself envying these people their ordinary concerns, their routines unmarked by fear and desperate flight. When the telegraph office opened, they sent a brief message to Whitfield, informing him of their change in plans and requesting a meeting at his office rather than awaiting his arrival in Cooperville. With that task complete, they made their way to the station to await the train to Denver. The passenger car was a luxury after their night in the freight train. Padded seats, a small stove providing heat, windows that offered views of the passing landscape. Harper found herself dozing, the events of the past days finally catching up with her. MacGregor kept watch, his weathered face betraying nothing of his own fatigue. Denver's skyline appeared on the horizon just after 10 o'clock, a sprawling city nestled against the backdrop of the mountains. As they drew closer, the scale of it impressed Harper. She had visited a few times as a child, but remembered little beyond the grand hotel where they had stayed and the elegant shops her mother had frequented. Address for Whitfield's office was on his telegram, MacGregor said as they disembarked. Larimer Street, not far from here. They made their way through bustling streets, Harper acutely aware of their disheveled appearance amid the well-dressed city dwellers. Whitfield's office was located in a handsome brick building that housed several law practices and a land management company. A brass plaque beside the door read, "James T. Whitfield, Attorney at Law." Harper took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders before entering. This was the moment they had fought and fled for, the chance to present her father's evidence to someone with the authority to act upon it. The office reception was tastefully appointed, with a young clerk seated at a desk near the entrance. He looked up as they entered, surprise evident in his expression as he took in their trail-worn appearance. "May I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he doubted they had legitimate business in such an establishment. "I'm Harper Jameson," she said, summoning all the dignity she could muster. "I have an appointment with Mr. Whitfield." The clerk's demeanor changed immediately. "Miss Jameson?" "Yes, Mr. Whitfield is expecting you. Please, come this way." He led them to a door at the rear of the reception area, knocking briefly before opening it to announce their arrival. James Whitfield was not what Harper had expected. She had imagined someone older, perhaps similar in appearance to her father. Instead, the man who rose from behind the desk was relatively young, perhaps in his mid-30s, with keen eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and a manner that suggested both intelligence and energy. "Miss Jameson," he said, coming around the desk to greet her. "I can't tell you how relieved I am to see you safe. And Mr. MacGregor, I presume? Please, sit down. You both look exhausted." They settled into comfortable chairs as the clerk discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind him. "I received your telegram from Cooperville," Whitfield continued, "and was preparing to depart with Marshal Foster when your second message arrived. The Marshal is currently securing warrants based on the information your father provided before his death, but he'll join us shortly." Harper leaned forward. "What information exactly?" "We found my father's journal with his real accounts and notes about Harding's activities, but he mentioned sending evidence to you." Whitfield nodded, opening a drawer in his desk. He removed a thick envelope, placing it carefully on the desk between them. "Your father contacted me approximately 3 months before his death," he explained. He had suspicions that Wallace Harding was engaging in fraudulent business practices, including bribery of bank officials and local law enforcement. He had begun gathering evidence documents, witness statements, financial records that showed discrepancies. "What kind of discrepancies?" MacGregor asked. "Primarily related to water rights and property valuations," Whitfield said. Harding had been systematically acquiring properties throughout the territory, often at prices well below market value. Your father discovered that in many cases, the sellers had been pressured through various means, threatened foreclosures based on suddenly discovered debts, diverted water sources that made ranching impossible, even physical intimidation. Harper's heart raced. This aligned perfectly with what they had found in her father's journal. "And he sent you proof of this, some," Whitfield confirmed. Enough to interest the territorial authorities, but not enough for definitive action. He was still gathering more when he hesitated. When he was murdered, Harper finished flatly. Whitfield's eyebrows rose. You have evidence of that? Harper withdrew her father's journal from her coat, placing it beside the envelope on the desk. His own words. He suspected Harding was tampering with his medicine. He knew Harding wanted our ranch and would go to any lengths to get it. The attorney opened the journal, scanning several pages with growing interest. This is significant, he said finally. Combined with what I already have, it creates a compelling case against Harding and his associates. Strong enough for arrests? MacGregor asked bluntly. With the marshal's warrants, yes, Whitfield assured him. In fact, a knock at the door interrupted him. The clerk entered, his expression troubled. Sir, there's a Sheriff Brody from Willow Creek here. He says he has a warrant for Miss Jameson's arrest on charges of theft and trespassing. Harper's heart sank. Brody had moved faster than they had anticipated, somehow tracking them to Denver and Whitfield's office. The attorney's response, however, was unexpectedly calm. Show him in, Richard. And send word to Marshal Foster that his presence is required immediately. Harper started to protest, but Whitfield held up a hand. Trust me, Miss Jameson, this may work to our advantage. Sheriff Brody entered with the swagger of a man confident in his authority. He was a stocky individual with a florid face and small, calculating eyes that fixed on Harper with satisfaction. There she is, he declared. Harper Jameson, you're under arrest for the theft of documents belonging to Wallace Harding and trespassing on his property. What documents would those be, Sheriff? Whitfield asked mildly. Brody glanced at the attorney, momentarily disconcerted by his lack of alarm. Private business records stolen from Mr. Harding's ranch office, and she was caught trespassing on his land with an accomplice. Interesting, Whitfield said, his tone conversational. Because I have here a journal belonging to Thomas Jameson, containing his personal business records. Are you claiming Mr. Harding has ownership of the late Mr. Jameson's private papers? Brody's face reddened further. Those papers were part of the property settlement when Harding purchased the Jameson ranch. They belong to him now. I see. And did this property settlement specifically include personal effects and private documents? I'd be interested to review the terms. The sheriff's confidence was visibly waning. Look, I don't have time for legal games. I have a valid warrant for this woman's arrest, and I intend to execute it. May I see this warrant? Whitfield held out his hand expectantly. Reluctantly, Brody produced a document from his coat pocket. Whitfield examined it carefully, his expression revealing nothing. This appears to be in order, he acknowledged, except for one small detail. It's only valid within your jurisdiction of Willow Creek. Denver is well outside your authority, Sheriff Brody. I have arrangements with the Denver police, Brody blustered. They'll honor my warrant. Perhaps, Whitfield agreed, but I think they might defer to a federal marshal in this matter, don't you? As if on cue, the office door opened again to admit a tall, imposing man wearing the distinctive badge of a U.S. Marshal. His cold eyes took in the scene, lingering briefly on Brody. Marshal Foster, Whitfield greeted him. Perfect timing. Sheriff Brody here was just attempting to arrest Miss Jameson on some rather dubious charges. The marshal nodded slightly. Was he now? Interesting, considering I have warrants for several individuals in Willow Creek, including Sheriff Brody himself. The color drained from Brody's face. What are you talking about? What warrants? Corruption, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, Foster recited casually. For a start. Might add a few more charges once we've had a thorough conversation. Brody's hand moved toward his gun, but Foster was faster. I wouldn't, the marshal advised quietly. "Would make things considerably worse for you." With the situation rapidly spiraling beyond his control, Brody made a desperate attempt to salvage his position. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was just following orders from Mr. Harding," Whitfield suggested. "Yes, we're quite aware of your arrangement with him. In fact, that relationship forms a significant part of the case against both of you." Harper watched in amazement as Marshal Foster disarmed Brody and placed him under arrest, reciting charges that included not only those he had mentioned earlier but also conspiracy in the death of Thomas Jameson. "We'll be heading to Willow Creek immediately to execute the remaining warrants," Foster informed Whitfield as he secured Brody's wrists with handcuffs, including the primary one for Wallace Harding. "What about Frank Turner?" Harper asked urgently. "Harding's foreman. He and his men have been hunting us through the mountains for days." "He's on the list," Foster confirmed, "along with Dr. Simmons, who we believe altered your father's medication at Harding's instruction." The reality of what was happening began to sink in. After 3 years of injustice, the tide was finally turning. Her father would have his vindication, and those responsible for his death would face consequences. But one crucial concern remained. "There's someone else," Harper said, turning to Whitfield. "Quentin Wade. He helped me discover my father's journal, has been protecting me since. He's currently at a cabin in the mountains west of here, possibly still being sought by Turner's men." "We'll send men to find him," Foster promised. "Just give us the location." As Harper described the location of Mac Gregor's cabin, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The nightmare was ending. Justice was within reach, and Quentin would be safe. "What happens now?" she asked once Brody had been removed from the office, escorted by one of Foster's deputies. "Now," Whitfield said, "we prepare your statement for the territorial court. The process of reclaiming your property will take some time. Legal proceedings always do, but with the evidence we have, I'm confident of success. And Harding will face trial for multiple crimes, including your father's murder if the evidence supports it. Given what I've seen so far, I believe it will." It was almost too much to absorb after days of fear and flight. Harper felt suddenly overwhelmed, tears threatening for the first time since this ordeal began. Mac Gregor placed a weathered hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. "You've been through a tremendous ordeal, Miss Jameson," Whitfield said gently. "I suggest you take some time to rest while we handle the immediate legal matters. I can arrange accommodations for you and Mr. Mac Gregor." Harper shook her head. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to go back. I need to find Quentin myself, make sure he's all right." "That's not advisable," Foster interjected. "We'll be making arrests in Willow Creek. The situation could be volatile." "I'm not suggesting I confront Harding," Harper clarified, "but I need to be there. I need to see this through to the end, and I need to find Quentin." After some discussion, a compromise was reached. Harper and Mac Gregor would accompany Marshal Foster and his deputies to Willow Creek, but would remain under protection until the arrests were complete. Then, with proper escort, Harper could return to the mountains to find Quentin. They departed Denver by mid-afternoon, traveling in a convoy of 3 wagons carrying Foster, his deputies, and their prisoners Brody and 2 bank officials who had been arrested in Denver, based on evidence from Thomas Jameson's documents. The journey would take them through the night, with an expected arrival in Willow Creek by morning. As they traveled, Harper had time to reflect on the extraordinary turn of events. Just over a week ago, she had been a woman without prospects, believing herself unwanted and without value. Now, she stood on the precipice of reclaiming everything that had been stolen from her: her father's legacy, her home, her future, and perhaps something more. The memory of Quentin's words echoed in her mind. Unfinished business. What might that business entail once justice was served and danger was past? The possibility brought warmth to her heart despite the cold night air. Dawn was breaking as they approached Willow Creek, the familiar landscape emerging from darkness. Harper felt a complex mixture of emotions: dread at returning to the place that held so many painful memories, determination to see justice done, and hope for what might follow. Foster's plan was efficiently executed. Deputies were dispatched to arrest Dr. Simmons and the bank manager, while Foster himself, accompanied by 4 armed men, headed for Harding's ranch to apprehend the man at the center of the conspiracy. Harper and Mac Gregor remained in town under the protection of 2 deputies, taking rooms at the hotel rather than Mrs. Holloway's boarding house to avoid drawing attention. From her window, Harper could see the general store where she had worked as a bookkeeper, the saloon where she had first encountered Quentin, the church where her parents had been laid to rest. It felt like viewing scenes from someone else's life, familiar yet distant, as if the woman who had moved through those spaces had been a different person entirely. In many ways, she supposed, that was true. The events of the past week had transformed her, awakening a strength and determination she hadn't known she possessed. Word of the arrests spread quickly through the small town. Harper could see clusters of people gathering on street corners, talking animatedly. Some would be Harding's allies, dismayed by his downfall. Others would be celebrating the end of his influence. Most, she suspected, would simply be adapting to the new reality, as people always did when power shifted. By mid-morning, Foster returned to the hotel, his expression grim but satisfied. "Harding's in custody," he reported. "Along with Turner, they didn't come quietly, but no one was seriously injured." "And the ranch?" Harper asked. "My father's home, secured for now. Once the legal proceedings confirm your ownership, you can take possession." It was happening so quickly after 3 years of stagnation. Harper felt almost dizzy with the pace of events, but one crucial piece remained unresolved. "I need to find Quentin," she said firmly. "He should be part of this. None of it would have happened without him." Foster nodded his understanding. "I've sent 2 men to the location you described. If he's there, they'll bring him back safely. If not, they'll search the surrounding area." But Harper knew the maze of canyons and ridges where Mac Gregor's cabin was hidden. "They won't find it without guidance," she insisted. "I need to go myself." After further discussion, a new plan was formed. Harper and Mac Gregor would depart immediately with 2 deputies as escort, heading for the cabin. If they found Quentin, they would return together to Willow Creek, where the legal proceedings would be underway. The journey into the mountains was arduous but familiar now. Harper led the way confidently, retracing the path she and Mac Gregor had taken days earlier. The snow had begun to melt in places, making the terrain muddy and treacherous, but they made steady progress. As they approached the ridge overlooking Mac Gregor's canyon, Harper's anxiety grew. What if Quentin had left, perhaps thinking they had abandoned him? What if Turner's men had found the cabin before being recalled for Harding's arrest? They descended carefully into the canyon, following the narrow trail Mac Gregor pointed out. The cabin came into view, looking exactly as they had left it, the small structure nestled against the cliff face, smoke rising from its chimney. Harper's heart leaped. Someone was there. She urged her horse forward, pulling ahead of the others in her eagerness to reach the cabin. The door opened as she approached, and Quentin stepped out, rifle in hand. He looked much improved from when she had last seen him. Color had returned to his face, and he stood straight and strong. As he recognized her, his serious expression transformed into a smile that made Harper's breath catch. "You're late," he called as she dismounted. Was starting to think I'd have to come looking for you." Harper couldn't help herself. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck in an embrace that spoke more eloquently than words. He returned it without hesitation, his rifle clattering forgotten to the ground as his arms encircled her. "You're all right," she murmured against his shoulder. "I was so worried." "Takes more than mountain fever to keep me down," he replied, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. Then more softly, "I missed you, Harper." She pulled back slightly to look at him, finding his blue eyes intense with an emotion that mirrored her own. "We did it," she told him. "Harding's been arrested, my father's name will be cleared, the ranch will be restored to me." Quentin's smile deepened. "I never doubted you would succeed." The arrival of the others interrupted their reunion, but the connection between them remained, a tangible thing that neither wished to break. As MacGregor explained recent events in greater detail, Quentin kept Harper's hand in his, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. The return journey to Willow Creek was filled with conversation, sharing experiences, filling in gaps, planning for what would come next. By the time they reached the town, Harper felt as though she had been away for months rather than days. So much had changed both in her circumstances and within herself. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Whitfield had prepared thoroughly, and the evidence against Harding and his co-conspirators was overwhelming. Within days, preliminary hearings had established sufficient cause for full trials, and the territorial court had issued an interim ruling restoring the Jameson Ranch to Harper's ownership, pending final resolution. Standing on the porch of what had once been her family home, Harper felt a complex mixture of emotions: joy at reclaiming her birthright, sorrow for the father who would never see this day, and uncertainty about the task that lay ahead. The ranch had been neglected under Turner's management, with fences in disrepair and outbuildings deteriorating. "It's a lot of work," Quentin observed, coming to stand beside her, "bringing it back to what it was." "Yes," Harper agreed. "More than one person could manage alone." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "You're not alone, Harper, not anymore." The words hung between them, laden with meaning. Harper took a deep breath, gathering courage for what she needed to say. "When we were in the mountains," she began, "you asked what I would do once I had the ranch back, whether I would rebuild alone." Quentin nodded, waiting. "I've been thinking about my answer," Harper continued, "about what I want for the future. This ranch was my father's dream and it became mine. But dreams change, evolve. They grow to include things we never anticipated." "Like what?" Quentin asked softly. "Like someone to share them with," Harper said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Someone who understands what it means to find home after years of searching." Quentin took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "I've drifted most of my life," he said, "never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But being with you these past days, fighting alongside you, seeing your courage and determination, it made me want things I never thought I needed." "What things?" "A place to belong, purpose beyond the next job or the next trail, someone who sees me clearly and values what she sees." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "You, Harper, I want you." The simple declaration made her heart race. "No one's ever wanted me before," she whispered, echoing the words she had spoken in the saloon when they first met. Quentin's smile was tender as he reached to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Then they all missed their chance, but I won't make the same mistake." He leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and Harper met him halfway. Their kiss was gentle at first, a question and an answer both, then deepened with the certainty of coming home after a long journey. When they finally drew apart, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Harper Jameson. Have since the moment you stood in that saloon, defiant despite your pain. I think I'll love you for all the days I have left." Tears pricked Harper's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I love you too," she replied. "Enough to ask you to stay, to build something here with me. To make this ranch ours, not just mine." "Nothing would make me happier," Quentin assured her. "Though I should warn you I'm better with cattle than crops." Harper laughed, the sound free and unrestrained for the first time in years. "We'll manage," she said, "together." In the months that followed, the Jameson ranch was transformed. Fences were mended, buildings repaired, cattle purchased to rebuild the herd. Word spread that the property was under new management, a partnership between Harper Jameson and Quentin Wade that extended beyond business into something more personal. Their wedding, held the following spring in the meadow where they had first discovered her father's hidden journal, was attended by the entire town. Even Mrs. Holloway wept openly as Harper and Quentin exchanged vows beneath an arch of wildflowers, pledging to face whatever came together. Angus MacGregor gave the bride away, his weathered face beaming with pride. James Whitfield, who had successfully prosecuted Harding and his conspirators, raised the first toast at the celebration that followed. And in a quiet moment as the festivities continued around them, Harper and Quentin slipped away to visit the small family cemetery on the property's edge. Standing before her parents' graves, Harper placed a bouquet of spring blossoms on each. "I did it, Father," she said softly. "I reclaimed what was stolen. Your name has been cleared and the ranch will continue as you dreamed." Quentin's arm around her waist offered silent support. "He would be proud of you," he said. "As am I." Harper leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his presence as she had learned to do in the months since their return. "I never thought I'd find happiness here again," she admitted. "After everything that happened, this place held too many painful memories. And now," she smiled up at him, "now it's where our story begins, where we build our future." As they walked back toward the celebration, hand in hand, Harper felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun in anger and despair in a saloon had led her through danger and loss to something she had never expected to find: not just justice for her father, but love for herself. A love that had seen her clearly from the first moment, that had recognized her worth when she had forgotten it existed. "You're quiet," Quentin observed as they paused on a rise overlooking their ranch now. "Having second thoughts?" Harper shook her head, squeezing his hand. "Just grateful for you, for this chance to begin again." "No one wants me," she had declared that day in the saloon, wounded and alone. "Then they all missed their chance," he had replied, a stranger then but now the center of her world. And as they returned to their wedding celebration, surrounded by friends and looking toward a future bright with promise, Harper knew with absolute certainty that both statements had been true. No one had wanted her until Quentin. And everyone else had indeed missed their chance to know the woman she had become, strong and determined, capable of fighting for what mattered and loving with her whole heart. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.